Hey y'all, what is up? Keasbey here, and today we're going to be looking at my updated Floowandereeze deck profile for the December 2022 format. So, if you tuned into my recent Flowcast live a few weeks ago, I mentioned that I was currently between two builds of the deck, one of which was kind of a mild update on my previous build, which had been working pretty well for me up until this point, and the other was something totally new that we actually rough drafted during that live, and that's the idea for a hard go second version of the deck. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. But before we get into that, don't forget to drop this video a like, subscribe to the channel for even more, and as always, if you want to help us out that little bit extra, check the link in the description to grab yourself a Keasbey TCG exclusive playmat. The playmats are custom designed by me for the channel, and everything from those goes a long way to helping us out. So before we get into the deck, a few things up front. First and foremost, I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I'm a little bit under the weather while recording this, but I don't want to put it off any further, so we're going to knock it out and you're going to hear my gravelly voice. So next, and relative to the deck, I'm still testing out this build. So far so good, it's been working really well. I'm going to have a replay commentary coming up for it in the near future, but again, I'm still testing out some card choices and ratios in it, but been going well enough, and I feel good about sharing it with all y'all so that if you do want to try out going second Floowandereeze, you at least have somewhere to start. Next, I've been playing this as a blind second deck, but I'm not sure if that's the way to do it or if you play it as a hyper optimized deck that can go second but still wants to go first. It's been performing better as a blind go second deck, but luckily I tend to lose die rolls all the time, so the choice really tends to fall out of my hands, but I think in the full matches, just for the confusion element that it seems to cause, blinding second is pretty great. And lastly, I can't take full credit for this concept. I've been kicking this idea around since before the ban list, funny enough, inspired by my time with Warrock, but it also seems to be the trend for the deck moving forward. If you look at some of the top cut lists, they're all main decking stuff like Lightning Storm and evenly matched at the moment. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. As always, I'm going to be making this profile as though the viewer has never read a Floowandereeze card before, so if you're new, welcome, enjoy. If not, get ready to hear me explain what Robina does for the 4th or 5th time on this channel. I won't go quite as in-depth as the previous profiles have done, and if you want very specific card-by-card tips and tricks for Floowandereeze, check out my Floowandereeze tips and tricks video. Link will be below and on screen. So first off, we've got our 1-card starter, Floowandereeze and Robina. She is one of 4 level 1 Floowandereeze monsters, and I'll sum up all of their shared effects really quick before talking through all of their unique effects card by card. So first, they all share the effect that after the resolution of their unique effect, you can immediately normal summon a winged beast from your hand. Of important note, this is not considered an effect to summon, so anything that interacts with an effect to summon does not apply here. Also, since the summon happens after the resolution of the effect and not during, it does alter the options your opponent has to interact with a new bird hitting the field, so just something to keep in mind. Next up, they all share the effect that if you normal summon another winged beast while this card is banished face up, you can return it to your hand. The unique effects, in addition to the 2 above, are all hard once per turn uses. Activating any of the effects also restricts you from special summoning for the duration of the turn. This means if you activate one of them, you can't special summon, and if you special summon, you can't activate any of these. However, while they are all 1 use per turn, the special summon restriction is specifically tied to the activation of any of these effects. So if the activation is negated, the special summon restriction is offline. Doesn't come up terribly often, but really important to know. And finally, all these small birds share a condition that if, while face up, they were to leave the field in any way, bound for any destination, they are banished face up instead. This supersedes anything from a Compulse to an Evenly Matched to a Rise of the Mega Monarch, as they will just end up banished face up regardless of those cards' effects. Okay, with that out of the way, Robina's unique effect is to add a level 4 or lower winged beast from your deck to your hand when she is normal summoned. We're playing 3 as she is again our 1-card starter and unlocks the rest of our plays. Next up, we're on Floowandereeze and Eaglin. Eaglin's effect, in addition to the above outlined shared effects, is that when he is normal summoned, add a level 7 or higher winged beast from your deck to your hand. We're on 3 of him as well, as while he isn't a 1-card starter, he is very important to have access to at every stage of the early game, and can be a 2-card starter with a lot of our cards. Next up, 1 copy of Floowandereeze and Toucan. Toucan is really solid. I've actually gone back and forth between 1 and 2 copies, but 1 has just felt like enough, and generally speaking, has been in practice as well. Toucan's unique effect is to target a Floowandereeze card in your banish zone and add it back to your hand. Really solid as the game grinds on for recurring any destroyed spells or traps, or just grabbing anything you might need via map. Following that, we're on 1 copy of Floowandereeze and Stree. Stree's unique effect is to target 1 card in either graveyard and banish it. So if you recall in my hot takes video, I mentioned I was considering 2 Stree due to all the milling that Enraging does, and that Stree was a solid tool in order to get small birds from the graveyard to the banish zone. On paper, that sounds pretty good. In practice, it does not work, as Enraging has not 1, but 2 cards that have engrave quick effects to shuffle up to 3 cards from either graveyard back into the deck. Basically meaning that if your opponent doesn't want Stree to resolve, Stree is not resolving. Granted, whatever you're targeting is going to end up back in the deck, you are losing out on the additional normal summon provided after resolving Stree, which really limits Stree's ability to start plays more than it already is. On that note, I do want to mention that despite the normal summon happening after the resolution of the small bird's effects, the small bird's unique effects do still have to resolve properly. For Rubina and Eaglin, that's pretty obvious, and I've never had a situation where I've activated one of those 2 effects and had it end up not being able to resolve. Obviously, not counting when they get negated, but Stree and Toucan can actually resolve without effect without having to be directly negated. For Stree, as I just mentioned, if it can't banish its target, be that by the target moving or something causing cards to become unbanishable, Stree will resolve without effect and no additional normal summon will take place. Toucan can happen mostly due to missequencing. If you start your turn with Map and Toucan, as a way of playing around the most interactions possible, you can use both Toucan and the banished bird off Map's return to hand effect to ensure that you get that bird back no matter what. However, if you sequence this in a way where Toucan is Chainlink 1, targeting the banished bird, and then Chainlink 2, that banished bird's own effect to return to hand, Toucan won't be able to recover its target and will end up resolving without effect, causing you to miss the additional normal summon at the end of the resolution. Granted, if you summon Toucan via map, you do still have a game mechanic normal summon for the turn to summon that small bird regardless, but it's always better to sequence the whole scenario properly. Next up, we're on Honorary Floowandereeze Monster, Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. Stormwinds, if you don't already know, says neither player can special summon any non-wind monsters. Just a neat meta-relevant and timely note, since this is a continuous effect, it is A, always on from the moment statue touches down on the field, and B, unaffected by Predaplant Dragostapilia's negation effect, since that only covers activated effects. Just some good info to know. I am contradicting myself a little bit. We're maining 1, but we do have a second one in the side deck. I still think 1 in the main deck is solid, but for crafting a deck out of the side, the second one isn't too bad either. Now, on to the big birds. We're on 2 copies of the Queen herself, Floowandereeze and Empen. Empen does a lot. First, on her tribute summon, you can add any 1 Floowandereeze spell or trap from your deck to your hand, and then after the resolution of this effect, normal summon any monster. This one is not limited to Winged Beast, but for the purposes of this profile, that's not really relevant. I will say that if you want to side raw Sphere Mode, we aren't, but if you did, using Empen to summon Sphere Mode on your opponent's turn is one of the funniest plays possible. Next, she has a battle trick effect that if she is battling during damage calculations, you can banish a card from your hand and have the attack and defense of whatever she is battling. Keep in mind, this works if she is attacking or being attacked. And lastly, as long as you control this tribute summon monster, your opponent cannot activate the effects of special summon monsters that are in attack position. This effect is really cool. I'll be covering it a bit more in depth in an upcoming video, but just to mention here, sometimes the way the chain resolves when playing Floowandereeze actually lets you cut off effects from even triggering on a newly summoned monster in attack mode if they hit the field during the chain Empen is summoned in and haven't had a chance to trigger on their own new chain yet. Overall, Empen is great. 2 huge things I want to point out about her effect. First, and this doesn't come up often, but it's good to be aware of, nothing on her prevents you from special summoning. Again, it's niche, but important to know. And even more relevant, nothing on her is once per turn, like at all. Next up, we're on Ryza the Mega Monarch. He is a beast. Well, a winged beast, but you know. On tribute summon, target one card on the field and one card in the graveyard, spin them back to the top of the deck in any order. If you tributed a win attribute monster as part of his summoning, you can also target one additional card on the field and spin it back to the hand. Also, you can treat a previously tribute summoned monster as the entirety of his tribute requirement. Okay, so a lot to talk about here. First, you can mix and match the sides of the field you target, letting you spin a threat away while also stacking something back on top of your own deck for a new use, such as a Dimension Shifter, a card that we might be playing. Next, Ryza can self-target, so you can always bounce him back to your own hand. This is very relevant because you might notice that there is no once per turn clause on him, and a good Floowandereeze setup actually enables you to potentially get 2 summons out of him in a single turn. I will mention very quickly, he interacts really well with Unexplored Wind's Mulligan effect specifically, effectively allowing you to stack something from the graveyard on top of the deck, self-bounce himself, and then use Winds to put him at the bottom of the deck, keeping Eaglin's Search effect alive for grindier games, and immediately redrawing whatever you stacked from the graveyard all in one shot. Unfortunately, he has a negative interaction with Wind's effect that allows you to send one monster you control and one monster your opponent controls to the graveyard to perform a tribute summon, as while his base effect will trigger due to the summon still being treated as a tribute summon, no actual tributing occurs, so you cannot achieve the condition of having tributed a wind monster. More about Unexplored Winds coming up later. Next up, one copy of Mist Valley Apex Avian. Apex Avian says once per chain, when your opponent activates a card or effect, target a Mist Valley monster you control. This can include itself. Bounce it back to the hand, and if you do, negate the effect and destroy the card. And what do you know? Another card with no once per turn clause on it that you can potentially summon multiple times in a turn. Just of note regarding Apex, it does have to successfully return its target, so in our case itself, back to the hand to actually resolve properly. We're on 1, though I've seen lists cut it, but I think it's a really good option if you get hit with early back row removal and need to shotgun your Dreaming Town at a bad time, and it does wonders in the mirror match. Following that, we have the aforementioned Dimension Shifter. D-Shifter is insane. Send him from the hand to the graveyard while your graveyard is empty, and until the end of the next turn, all cards that would go to the graveyard are banished instead. Not only does this offer huge levels of disruption, by the way, it is a quick effect, but it also makes all your Floowandereeze spells very easy to recover with Toucan, as well as your Empen, and shuts off anything, hand traps included, that need to send themselves to the graveyard as cost or need to hit the graveyard to resolve. It just does absolute wonders for this deck and is generically good in a format where the tier 0 deck needs to mill to the graveyard for their effects to go off. That's it for the monsters. Let's look at some spells. First, we're on triple copies of Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map. So Map is a remarkably strong field spell, even though it unfortunately doesn't self-start our plays like some other field spells do. On an ignition effect, you can reveal a level 1 Floowandereeze monster in your hand, banish a Floowandereeze card with a different name from your deck, and then after this effect resolves, immediately normal summon the revealed monster. So at its most basic, you can use this to get access to the next small bird you need while creating a chain block for the first bird you summon. But keep in mind, you can banish any card with this, so you can combo it with Toucan, for example, to get any Floowandereeze spell or trap from the deck, or use it to set up a 2 Empen summon in a single turn. You just have so many options with this card. Also important to note that this does not count towards your game mechanic normal summon. So you do still have that to use afterwards as well should you need it. Next, Map has a trigger effect that if your opponent normal summons, it activates, and then after the resolution of that placeholder effect, immediately normal summon a Floowandereeze monster. So this effect is not limited to our small birds and can include tribute summoning Empen, which has some cool interactions with Unexplored Winds that will catch a lot of players off guard. Also, cool to note for specifically the mirror, this effect works on either player's turn. Both of these effects are hard once per turn, however the actual activation of Map is not. So if you open 2 and your first one is destroyed, even if you use the effect already, you can drop a new one from your hand to use on your opponent's turn. Lastly, no part of Map's effect restricts you from special summoning, so if you do need to make an emergency double Azaeus or access code climb, Map can just be double summoned if you have 2 small birds in hand. Doesn't come up very often, but it is very important to be aware of. Next up, one copy of Terraforming. I like it. I do see the argument for cutting it, and I do side it out sometimes, but I just like having even more access to map, since 3/4 of our small birds cannot act as one-card starters. Terraforming was much more defendable when Mystic Mine was still legal, but I think there's still an argument for it with how important map is to the deck, and the above-mentioned fact that if you do lose your map, you can drop a second one to potentially get some use out of it on your opponent's turn as well. And now, 3 copies of Floowandereeze and the Advent of Adventure. Banish a winged beast from your hand or field as cost. Add either a Floowandereeze monster or field spell from your deck to your hand. Massively important, it acts as a consistency boost and a means for dodging targeted negates and getting small birds banished to act as a chain block down the line as well if you need to go that route. All of this on a quick play spell. Not much more to say about it beyond don't forget that it can add map to your hand as well as the birds, and we absolutely must be playing 3 of this. It is just such an amazing card for this deck. More in the way of consistency boosting, we are on 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. If you are on a budget, you could play Extrav here, but you just get so much more flexibility with Prosperity. Do remember the half damage clause on this card does come up, so if you don't need it to go off before the battle phase, always good to get your damage in early, then use this main phase too, as unlike Extrav, it can be used at any point during a turn. Our extra deck is basically a bunch of one-off specific utility tools, so we've got plenty of ammo to use for this card. Keep in mind, this card does have another restriction that you cannot draw cards via card effect the turn you activate this card. So that counts before or after, but it is tied to the activation. So if Prosperity's activation is negated, you can draw again via card effect. Next, 3 copies of Pot of Duality. We so rarely need to special summon, this card is basically just free half Prosperity. We're on 3 as much as I love this deck, it does have some inherent consistency issues that we just cannot ignore. Following that, 1 copy of Gold Sarcophagus. This is basically our 41st card of the deck, and again, there is an argument to cut it, but I like it as it kind of acts as a miniature version of both map and advent in its own weird way, turning any of our small birds into full combo or creating a chain block for that first bird to dodge a direct response negation. Next up, we've got 1 copy of Floowandereeze and the Unexplored Winds. Check out the Floowandereeze playlist on the channel. I have like 2 or 3 other videos where I talk about this card pretty in depth, so I'll just give you the basic outline of it here and mention the biggest highlights of it. So first, you can reveal up to 2 winged beasts in your hand, stack them to the bottom of the deck, and draw that many cards. So this effect does have a conflict with Pot of Prosperity since it is drawing via card effect. Worth noting, the reveals / stacking and drawing all happen on resolution, so your opponent does have to decide if they want to interact with this effect before they know what and how many cards you are revealing. Next, the big effect. If you would perform a tribute summon requiring exactly 2 tributes, you can instead send 1 monster you control and 1 card your opponent controls to the graveyard to perform that tribute summon. First and foremost, this is not a cost, so it does not conflict with Dimension Shifter. Next, this does not activate, it just happens, greatly limiting how your opponent can play around this happening. Due to the way Floowandereeze monster effects resolve into being summoned, it actually can cause cards to leave the field mid-chain before they have a chance to trigger on a new chain. It is very strong and has a variety of cool ways that it can be immensely disruptive. Definitely check out the tips and tricks video for more information on the finer points of this card. We're actually going to go slightly out of order here and jump into the traps for a moment and talk about Floowandereeze and the Dreaming Town. So, during the main phase, after this card resolves, again, it's another placeholder effect that doesn't do anything but simply tells you that after it resolves to take an action, you can immediately normal summon a level 4 or lower winged beast from your hand. So a few cool points about this. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Floowandereeze monster, and if it is summoning Barrier Statue at Chainlink 2 or higher, specifically at Chainlink 2 or higher, your opponent can't do anything to interact with the Barrier Statue until that chain has finished fully resolving, as new activations cannot be added to an already resolving chain. Again, more about this in the tips and tricks video, but I'm also covering it in an upcoming video as well, as it's caused a couple of arguments before. We're playing 1, but this part of the effect is not once per turn if you do want to test out multiples. What is a hard once per turn though is if Dreaming Town is in the graveyard and you tribute summon a level 7 or higher monster, you can banish Dreaming Town for cost to Book of Moon your opponent's entire field. This can be turn ending and is one of this deck's major power plays. Do remember though, your opponent can use face down monsters for fusion materials. Very relevant in the current metagame. Now let's go back and get into the Go Second suite of cards. First off, 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. So we were actually playing this in the original Go First build, and it really overperformed in there when we lost dice rolls, so not much more to say about it beyond. Floowandereeze doesn't necessarily need to OTK, rather just set up to make your opponent's hand and remaining resources unusable, so we don't really care so much about the no damage clause. Also of note, Dark Ruler No More is not once per turn, so if you do open multiple, if the first one is negated or your opponent adds to their field after you resolve the first one, fire off the second. Next up, 2 copies of Lightning Storm. Back row is pretty hot right now. Tier Element has 2 really good ones that they can search, so clearing those out is very important. Or just punish players for summoning an attack position too much. Either or, this is a great card for going second. 1 activation per turn, so if you open both and the first one is negated via Tier Element Crime, well, you can drop the second one since Crime negates activation specifically. I know I'm talking about that matchup a lot, but it's most of what I see these days, so I'm going to bring it up. We're also on 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster for the obvious reasons outlined above. I would 100% be playing 2 of these if not for the deck space, and the fact that it is limited. Closing out the main deck, we're on triple copies of Evenly Matched. Similar vibe to Dark Ruler No More, we can fade a turn's battle phase in exchange for clearing a board out for us to set up to control the game. And guess what? Like Dark Ruler No More, Evenly Matched, not once per turn. Alright, so that does it for the main deck. Let's take a look at the extra deck. So the part of the extra deck you will be going into most often if you are using it at all, we've got our Lyrilisks, Recital Starling, Promenade Thrush, and Assembled Nightingale. In order of usage, Recital Starling can ram into an opponent's monster, dealing the damage to both players. She also has an effect to add a level 1 winged beast from your deck to your hand. I've never actually used this portion of her effect, but it's good to be aware of in a really weird game state. Promenade Thrush is more or less an out to zombie world. She can spin a spell or trap back into the deck. She can also detach materials from herself to boost another monster by 300 per each material detached. I have actually used this effect before to get over a Geomathmech Final Sigma, so yeah, Promenade Thrush. Also, you can actually out skill drain with her if you also have Advent of Adventure by going Chainlink 1 Thrush, targeting the skill drain, and then Chainlink 2 Advent, banishing her for cost, so that now at Chainlink 1, she will no longer be under skill drain due to being banished. As dumb as this sounds, it has come up. And lastly, Assembled Nightingale gains 300 for each material attached to her, can attack a number of times equal to the material attached to her, and most importantly, can attack directly. All of these cards, while boosting their own unique effects, generally lead to our next card, and that being Downerd Magician. Downerd Magician has text on her. I've never read it beyond you can overlay her onto a rank 3 or lower Xyz monster you control during main phase 2. Just kidding, I have read her, but her unique effect has never come up before in this deck. She generally leads to our next card, and that card is Divine Arsenal AA Zeus. I mean, not much more to say about Zeus that hasn't already been said. He's always around as a backup plan should you need him. And as War Rocks have proven, AA Zeus control is not the worst thing that you can be doing after you've cleared out a bunch of your opponent's resources. Following that, we have a very janky out to There Can Be Only One in Link Karibo and Nightmare Phoenix. Basically, you use map to summon a small bird, then make Link Karibo, and again, keep in mind we can't use any part of our small bird's effects during this play. Then with your game mechanic normal summon a second small bird out, link them both into Phoenix. It's not a good state of affairs when you are in this position that you have to be doing this, but it does come up and it is very worth knowing. Next, we've got 2 Tri Brigade cards in Ferajit and Shurag. So I've never actually made either of these before. They've floated in and out of my builds, but we have the space for them, and their effects aren't too bad if you're ever in that very rare Link climb. I will mention Shurag can potentially come up if you lose all of your big birds and need something to go into with your small birds, though generally if you can make it this far into linking, access code would likely have been the better move, but again, we have the space and more options is always good. Speaking of, let's start the climb to access code talker with one copy of Relinquished Anima. You can also use Link Karibo here, but Anima is nice if your opponent poorly places a monster such as a Dragostapelia, pretty relevant right now, forcing them to use its Predator counter for the turn on Anima before you continue to Link Climb. Also, he's just an additional attribute to banish for when you do finally reach access code talker. Next up in that access code climb, we've got Dark the Dark Charmer and Win the Wind Charmer. Dark is solid as it's a very common attribute, giving you plenty of potential targets to summon back, and by using Link Karibo or Anima, we can get our needed Dark to summon him. Win is really important for cases where you have Barrier Statue live, as since she is a wind, you can get out from your own statue lock for emergency extra deck plays, plus an additional attribute for access code. Her search is pretty solid, letting you grab an Eglin or a Toucan, but I've never actually had that come up before. Most importantly, both of these are spellcasters for our next Link climb into Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. So while she can't summon back the Charmers, I made that mistake in a previous video, she summons in defense positions specifically, and Link monsters cannot go into defense mode. Oops. Our good friend Dimension Shifter, though, is a spellcaster that she can make use of. Just keep an eye on the spell count, as if you did fire off D-Shifter, a lot of spells that were used could be banished instead of in the graveyard, and those will not give her spell counters. And finally, the boy himself, Access Code Talker. So a fun note, a 5300 access code, which would have been made if you linked up through Selene, plus our Floowandereeze and Empen, is exactly 8,000 damage. This came up very recently. Also, in a pinch, access code can actually banish himself for cost. This, as well, as dumb as it sounds, has also been relevant in winning a game before. Also, he doesn't target, very important to know. And to close out our extra deck, we've got one copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. She's basically our best answer to any towers type monster that we can't beat over, and there's a really cool video on the Floowandereeze playlist of me summoning her and access code in the same turn, in a Floowandereeze deck. So figure that one out. She's very specific in her use, but given we have the space, there's absolutely no reason not to run one copy of her. Alrighty, that does it for the toolbox of an extra deck, so let's talk about the side deck. So this is where I'm still doing the most testing at the moment. Fans of the channel might have noticed the lack of enemy controller in the main deck. Well, it jumps in and out of the side deck depending on my mood, along with some other cards, but this is what I've been rolling with at the moment, and it has been working out pretty well. First off, we're on an extra copy of Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. I know, I've said you only need one, and I do still think one is solid, but I'm testing the 1-in-1 split, which I did say was what I would do if I wanted to run two, so I'm not totally going against past me on this one. That being said, this is the one that I'm most unsure of, as it hasn't come up super often, but in the times that it has been pretty good, so I'm still kind of debating on what to do about this. Following that, we are on two copies of DD Crow. So I took Crow out of the main deck, as one copy of it really wasn't doing too much at this point, and two, alongside all the other Go Second cards and Dimension Shifter, it just felt like something that could be swapped in for matches where maybe Shifter wasn't the best card, and a more focused single card graveyard hate was the move, like against Sprite, where in early Dimension Shifter they'll alter their plays to end on red and carrot. A late Crow into the Swap Frog can leave them committing to a very different board that might be more limited in what they can set up to play against. Again, this is another one I'm not totally sure about, but I will also mention that Crow is very good once you get into a grind game against your elements and they're playing off the top of the deck, since even dodging your Crow by shuffling their target back, if said target was attempting to resolve, it will resolve without effect due to leaving the graveyard before it could be used for a fusion. Next up, triple copies of Cosmic Cyclone. I like Cosmic in this deck over Twin Twisters, as early in the game you can end up using almost your entire hand. Again, not totally sure how much we need three given what we're playing in the main deck, but I do like having them as an option for when we are going first against back row heavy decks. Okay, so we're on three copies of Dimension Shifter in the side deck. Another card that I'm not 100% sure of. I've never liked siding it when it was at 1, as it always felt like it could have been more useful being a second copy of something else, and it really isn't a 4th, 5th, or 6th copy of Dimension Shifter, as it does lose a lot of its utility going second, especially since the Tear Element field spell can clear it more or less as soon as it hits the field if they have a very easily set up graveyard from their own turn. We are siding the 3 of them because it is very solid going first against Tear Element and any other graveyard heavy deck, and I think having access to seeing it about 33% of the time is way more worth it than the 12% of the time when it was at 1. I'm not 100% sold on it yet, but I am still trying it out. Given though it is such a must remove for Tear Elements, it does kind of act like some light protection for your map in that regard. Following that, we're on triple copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. I absolutely love this card, and going first, it will win you mirror matches, plus it protects you from stuff like Dark Ruin, Omora, Lightning Storm, Raigeki, etc., and hinders a lot of decks or forces them to use a lot of their quick plays earlier than they would actually want to be using them. Also, given that it's generally a pretty high priority target for your opponent to deal with, obviously we aren't siding into it in non-spell heavy matchups, it again can act as a form of pseudo protection for Dreaming Town if your opponent has to choose what to hit with a Twin Twister early, and you have this, multiple face downs, and a map. We sided in going first is generally once we set up, we can take the turn to wait on our own spells from there. Also, it interacts hilariously with Ryza, potentially spinning spells that were set to be used later on back on top of the deck. And lastly, we're on 3 copies of Harpy's Featherstorm. This card is insane, I love restacking it with Ryza, and it is very much a side card for this specific build since we are hard leaning on going second. But yeah, this card can win games more or less on its own, especially with the aforementioned Ryza and a half decent setup going behind it. So that has been the deck. Again, like I mentioned up top, I'm still doing a little bit of testing, a bit on how I actually want to play the deck, and a bit on the card choices and very much the side deck, but it's been going well enough for me and I felt good enough to share it with all of y'all. If you want to try it out, definitely let me know how it goes. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop it a like, subscribe to the channel for even more, and as always, if you want to help us out that little bit extra, check out the link in the description to grab yourself a Keasbey TCG exclusive playmat, and I will catch y'all later.